Welcome, everyone. I'd like to welcome you all to a presentation of the National Arts Club Architecture Committee. Throughout the year, we offer programs monthly on a great many aspects of architecture. Be sure to look for our upcoming programs. We'll be presenting a program on the UN Secretariat in November, on a great new development in downtown New York City called Essex Crossing in December, and we have a full calendar of events upcoming. Today, we have with us Robert A. King, architect and AIA Fellow. Robert is a longtime member of the National Arts Club and the Architecture Committee. His hobby is architectural photography, and he has amassed tens of thousands of images from New York and around the world of architectural details and, well, anything that catches his extremely discerning eye. He has gathered many pictures into books, but nothing is better than having Robert right here with us to talk about them with his irrepressible enthusiasm and knowledge. I'm looking forward to this. We'll be taking questions for Robert during the program, and I may ask one or two or three during the program, but certainly at the end, we'll have plenty of time for Q&A, so we'll try to get to as many questions at that point as we can. We look forward to the time we can resume gathering in person, but although this program is online, we feel that you are here with us at the National Arts Club. Please join me in welcoming Robert A. King. Robert?
Hi, everyone. Let me just share my screen with you so you can see the presentation. Again. Okay. The focus of this lecture will be basically on the Lower East Side, but also this is about how I got into this project of taking building details and became a little obsessed with New York and then other cities beyond. Being from a West Indian background, I had to keep busy and I only had a 14-hour day, so I decided to take a class in women in photography. And the assignment in that class was photographing women. And what I did is I went around New York City and I started photographing women. Many of the students, my fellow students, photographed women who were alive, but I felt getting a release and being questioned and maybe having taken someone out to lunch became a little difficult. But these women in stone, they all were there for me, and their facial expressions were pretty constant every time. And after that adventure, I decided on my own I was going to photograph men in New York. Now, most of these details, not all, many of them, are between 1870 and 1930. And with the housing boom, these faces, which gave buildings identity, were very popular. So after I exhausted many men around the city, then I decided I would do animals. And I covered all 5 boroughs, and Staten Island was the most challenging. And you'll see in the center here, this is pigeons, which is the only pigeons I found in New York, and that was in the Bronx. And I photographed even more animals, and I would go out basically on the weekends, mostly on Sunday morning when the streets are quiet. And then I started doing flowers in New York City. And so after a few years of doing New York, I decided to do some traveling around the state. And I got Philadelphia, Columbus, Ohio. Normally I would have 2 cameras with me, one to take the detail of the building and another wide angle lens to take the entire building. And went to Seattle, Albany, New York, Trenton, New Jersey. Most of the time I would photograph in the winter, mainly because of the sun. I felt the sunlight was better, but also the trees did not block the details. After about 42 years, I got in touch with a friend of mine, and they live in Denmark. And I was discussing what I was doing on my little hobby, and they said, why don't you come to Europe? So they made arrangements for me to come to Europe, and I have Amsterdam, Madrid, Copenhagen, Barcelona, Paris, London. I went to school there. Oslo, Norway, Lisbon. I will describe some of the buildings that later on, what some of the details are. Lisbon, Stockholm, Berlin, and it was fun doing other cities around the world. I'm kind of landlocked right now. On the Lower East Side, when I had the assignment, what I would do is just go walk around a neighborhood, and just driving doesn't work. It only can be done on foot, and cover. And I've been to maybe about 10 times I've been, or more, been to the Lower East Side, and would spend usually about 3 or 4 hours just walking the streets. Many of the details, as I mentioned, from the time period, and they're like this detail here is right below the window, right there. And what they mean, some of them are just for fun, some of them are relatives or people that existed. This, not sure who this person is, looking straight on at the building. Another figure. No, one of the biggest differences I noticed was the eyes of the building, as this one you see is blank. And that, I think, I'm not sure, indicated the craftsman, possibly. And this kind of an exaggerated face. Many of the factories that did these faces were located in Red Hook, Brooklyn, where the stone was shipped, they were carved, and they were then installed on the building. And one of the interesting things I found, they were multicultural craftsmen who did this artwork. And this more looks like a Native American, I'm not sure who it is. And you see, on a narrow street, I could not get the angle, because many of them look straight on, but there is a slight angle. I go back as far as I can. And this face, again, now you'll notice in the eyes here is a little more pupil. Either the craftsman, the school they went to, there's very little detail. Most of the buildings I would photograph in most of the cities are buildings that are not famous. One objective I had was to show there is beauty in almost every neighborhood. And that's if you look, in the older neighborhoods, that is. And here's that face again on another building on Elridge Street, the 21. This is what happens sometimes when the details are not protected. The damage from the birds and the lack of maintenance and cleaning. It's unfortunate sometimes, because this face is up and this here, that one can't see the face from the street. And maybe this face, maybe you're glad you can't see it from the street. But now, this building on Henry Street, a very happy looking face. And notice the eyes here are a little more recessed. I sometimes question, I had no knowledge of why some of them have horns and why they don't. Whether it's a negative or positive thing, it could be just the art itself. And this building, probably paying respect to a person, possibly. And this is either the builder's child or the owner's child being put on the building. And there's another building in Manhattan on Convent Avenue where they had 3 children and they were all on the building. And I could tell because they were all different looking. This face here, I believe, is a rabbi or the cantor of the neighborhood. This face and a similar face shows up many times only in this area of the city. The only similar one I found was on the west side on 86th Street that was next to a synagogue. But this face shows up quite often. You'll see more of it later. And this, again, a woman, the owner, the builder, it's in doubt. There's no history of the detail. I could find history of the buildings, but on the details, I could not find anything. And just the factories and some of the workers that did there. And this face, this African face with horns on the Lower East Side. In Jacob Riis's book, How the Other Half Lives, he describes the different ethnic groups in the 5-point area of the Lower East Side, and I find it interesting. But also, this detail is on 3 different buildings in the area of the Lower East Side. A pretty face, but who is it? It's doubt. A little scary face. Could be for Halloween, but again, notice the eye. And this face over another face over a door of this building. This building on Monroe Street, there is about a little over half a dozen faces, and I believe it's the family that developed the building. I'm only speculating, but because they all have slightly different features, but they're all on the same building, and that I found to be a little unusual. And look, noting the eyes are the same on all of those. This was on a narrow street on Orchard Street. And the other one, notice the recessed eyes. Many of them, sometimes I would get people following me because they were doubting or had questions on what I was doing. In this building with the horns. And why? No knowledge. I don't know whether it's negative or positive. I think it doesn't matter. Just looking at the art. But on this building, 57 Bayard Street, notice the eyes, and then the same building, different eyes. And so I believe, speculating, it's done by a different stonecutter. And some of the buildings had more of an Asian feel to them. Again, whether that reflected where the ethnic groups lived or not, or just from the artisan and the developer. This is the face that I found most often on the Lower East Side. And again, as I covered all 5 boroughs, well, I think pretty extensively, but I've not found this face with this hat anywhere else in New York City. And I believe this is the cantor. I've done some research, but I've not come up with any firm conclusion. And this, I believe, is his wife. Also appears on many buildings on the Lower East Side. And a lion in this building with eyes that are recessed, with biting onto a ring. And this is a little cute on the building. And so you'll notice that many buildings at that time had names, and this gave the building more of an identity. Instead of I lived on 84 Madison Street, one can say I live in the Lincoln Building. And many of the details I felt gave buildings more of an identity. So maybe a little pride in a building where one lived. Now these buildings on Madison Street, they were made of brownstone and they decayed, as you can see. I believe this hat is that of a nurse. Not sure, with birds on it, obviously. But you can see the decay of the building, which is unfortunate. And also on 86 Madison Street, this was a row of buildings that they did, the developer built. Well, the same building, this one, and these eyes. And this is a Viking, and why they would have a Viking on a building on the Lower East Side in the 1880s could be questionable. Another lion with a ring in its mouth. And then the rabbi comes again, and on 108 Elridge and his wife. And they're usually located at the top of the, well, she usually is at the top and he's on the lower floor. The rabbi once again, now notice the eyes are a little different, and his wife. The rabbi again, slightly different features, but still in the same vein as many of the others. In this building at 110 Madison Street, you can, this is right near the entry. It's, I believe, down here, and obviously checking out all those who enter the building. And this is on one of the upper floors, detail, the eyes. And this, oops, there you go. And then another detail on 110 Madison Street, which is a whatever kind of animal you maybe want it to be, possibly. And this is the first picture I took when I took my class it was in 1996 that I took this class. And this was the first one I took, which I thought was interesting, and even though I developed more interest later. And here you are again on 112 Ludlow, which I believe is the rabbi's wife. And this one could it be a religious figure? Could it be a developer? Just someone that the neighborhood would want to pay homage to. And for myself, I was very impressed that developers and people would give respect to the different people who had influence in the neighborhood. Again, I believe the rabbi's wife. And here at the top of this building, narrow street, obviously, I have I believe it's a Native American. Actually, around Gramercy Park on 20, I believe it's 20th Street, on in the eastern part of the park, there's a building with many Native American figures on the building, and they're gorgeous if you're in that neighborhood, which is right around the National Arts Club. How convenient. And this is, again, I believe, a rabbi and his wife. The wife's eyes seem pretty consistent on many of the buildings that I've found them. Usually when I'm on the Lower East Side, I walk down the street, and I may go again, I walk down the street, and I'd walked down Madison Street several times, usually on the west side of the street. And then one day I walked on the east side of the street and I discovered this detail. These are right here. And they're absolutely gorgeous. These are one of a kind. Never seen this anywhere else in New York or any other cities. But also I found on this one, you'll notice the detail right here, this plaque, which is the Boston Terracotta Company, 1901, and the sculptor or the artisan initials are RP, which is in the United States, I found that very rare that the sculptor had their initials on them. And again, these are not famous buildings. These are regular buildings. Another one of I believe, the rabbi and his wife.
Robert, can I interrupt you for a question?
Sure.
You've pointed out the rabbi and the rabbi's wife a number of times now. Yes. And are they identical? Were they perhaps cast and not carved?
I believe they were cast, but some may be carved because sometimes it's a slightly different feature. And sometimes mostly the eyes, they're slightly different. But this is the only place in New York that I found these details. I mean, even in Bensonhurst and areas like that, in Williamsburg, I've not found these details either. But I believe they may be cast, and maybe the cast had changed some, but the similarity are so close. They're done by the same factory or the same cutter group. Okay? And the building was done in around 1930, the post office on the Lower East Side. And I felt it was really nice that they put a detail on the building showing Mercury, the delivery of mail. And this detail, which is almost a repeat of one you saw earlier. And this one, a very exaggerated detail. And you don't know whether this is put to give respect to that detail, what it is. Was this person a person that they're giving respect to and maybe exaggerating their looks? All doubtful. And I'm not I'm a full-time architect, but this is my hobby, but I've not found any information on that. And again, I believe the rabbi, it's slightly different features, but the hat and the wife. And 162 Henry Street. And this one I found to be very interesting. That's quite a tongue. Very good at dinner time. But why? Someone knows, I'm sure. And here's the rabbi again with different eyes, and his wife with the same eyes that she's always pretty consistent on that. And here's another one on Orchard Street. This one kind of exaggerated. Hard to tell whether that's a smile or a cry. And this detail of Adam and Eve on Henry Street, it's also right near Gracie Mansion. Also, the exact same detail. So which kind of shows many of these were stock details. Here we are on Henry Street, the rabbi and his wife. And sometimes people tried, as you can see, tried to render or repair or restore and didn't do such a great job. And here's another one. And I think a nurse, my mother was a nurse, and they had the history of their hats. And this building is called the Henrietta. And this is Viola. This is the, well, when I'm down in that area, I always seem to visit Viola. I know she looks like she's not smiling, but when I'm there, she gives us a very small smile. So if you're in the neighborhood, please say hello to Viola for me. And then here we are again, I believe, a religious figure. The wife, possibly, because it's on the same building. Again, I believe possibly a nurse, but not sure. The rabbi comes up again, and his wife. And what I found that what I consider to be the rabbi or cantor, that figure seems to change more than the wife, and from noting the eyes and the nose. And this is another religious figure. And if you weren't religious looking at him, you might become religious. And again, I believe, speculating the wife, the rabbi again. And I found this quite, for myself, I was very curious of who this is, and no information I could find on it. And I'm sure someone has information. And it's the same figure which we saw earlier on Hester Street, and this is, now she's on Broome Street. This, I think, is, again, possibly a nurse. So that's basically for the Lower East Side. And as I mentioned, I covered all 5 boroughs, which was quite challenging in a way, because I had to look at the neighborhoods that were generally trying to find depressed neighborhoods built between 1870 and 1930. And Staten Island was the most challenging, but I found it. But going on, looking at, now this building on 72-76 Wall Street, this building was in the shipping industry. So many of these details reflected what the developer or what the building was used for. And the detail you can see is magnificent. What I discovered for myself, right, because many people stand at Rockefeller Center looking at St. Patrick's Cathedral. So I decided to go to St. Patrick's Cathedral and look at the other side. And this is on the Rockefeller Center buildings, right, where Atlas is, on either side of Atlas, on about the 5th or 6th floor. Fascinating and unseen, and the shame of it, most people never notice it. Those who were watching me take pictures did, but many people don't notice this. And I think these details are exquisite. They're beautiful and they're well maintained. in the Bronx, Webster Avenue and East Tremont. The building, as you see at the lower portion there, the area somewhat needs a little work, but these details I thought were exquisite, nicely done. And the shame, what frightens me, I should say, is that if this building is being torn down, so ends the detail. And then I feel there must be some effort to try to save not only these details, but many of the artwork that was applied on buildings. This, a building on 42nd Street, has the months. And so, I mean, not just taking these pictures, what I do is on people's birthday, if your birthday is in August, I give you August. So it's used and has the whole signs of that building. Parkchester Housing Development, built in around 1940, has exquisite details. It's the one development that I think, the same group that did Stuyvesant Town and the Rivington in Harlem did this group of buildings called the Parkchester. And these details, by the way, these I give out on Valentine's Day. But these details I think are quite nice. There's such a variety of details. And in the center of the Parkchester housing is a fountain, which was the fountain of the 1938 World's Fair in New York. And this is my Father's and Mother's Day presents to my friends, also in Parkchester. This I sent to some old friends, very old friends, and all in Parkchester. Right around Bethesda Fountain on the staircase, there are these very fine details. Many of them had been damaged, but they were restored, as you can see on this B here. They were restored, and they're gorgeous. And as people walk down the stairs, and many don't seem to look, just to pause and take a moment to look. And this architect on this building on 111th Street, obviously a birthday present to my architect buddies. So about 2014, I basically got in touch with my friends there and live in Copenhagen. And I was telling them what I was doing. We've been Zooming, and they said, why don't you come to Europe and just exercise your artwork there and photograph? So I decided, why not? They made the arrangements for me, and I went. This was in Amsterdam. This is a four-story apartment building right over the entry door of the building. And I think it's absolutely gorgeous. And the fine detail of the peacock I found rare. This also in Amsterdam on an Art Deco building. And this detail is over the entry. I'm not sure whether they were into animals or whatever and some kind of religion, but it's basically a simple commercial building. And this building in Berlin with butterflies. My wife likes butterflies, so I gave her this as a present. Yet there's more to it than I just said. And also in Berlin, this is a school building for children. And this is on these upper floors right here. So I had to go about a block and a half. I have a zoom lens of approximately 700, so I can get it pretty well. But I thought this was exquisite. And you can see how it's done in panels. They're done in the factory and installed on the building site. And this building showing the children with, I guess, reading, with photography, which I thought was quite interesting, displaying it's a building for children. And in Copenhagen, on the Carlsberg Beer Museum building, they have these animals on the first floor. I'm not sure why or what they represent, but they're nice to look at. And in Copenhagen, this, I believe, pretty sure was a school building. I don't think it's a school building now, but the three owls. And many owls were on school buildings, or the goddess Minerva, I believe, for education, that was also in school buildings. So it had these details were not just random, they had some thought behind them. And in Helsinki, on this office building, they had these figures which I spoke to some people in Finland and they could not explain it either. Why? And I'm sure when someone was alive, they could have, but these figures were in the lower portion of the building. And this one was the most interesting because this is on a hill. And in the evening we walked by and I felt this building had a detail. My friends said, no, it doesn't. It can't be there. So I went out about 5 in the morning and this is the lens and this is the detail. And I showed this to the people in Finland, and what they did, I gave them a show of the details of Finland to the Finnish consulate. And this in Lisbon, this was a theater. Now it's a department store, and they have these. Now you notice the spikes on this. This keeps the pigeons off, is why. But from the street level, one cannot see these, and is why I feel they're in such good condition. And across the street, this is in the Hard Rock Cafe, which was previously also a theater. So this part of town was seemed to be an entertainment section. And this, what I took in Madrid, as I was walking, because the sun is important when photographing some of the details, because it gives it the detail more character. And I noticed this, and right across the street from this was these construction workers were renovating a building. So I tried to explain to them in English that I needed for them to stop work for a moment so I could take the picture. And they naturally responded in Spanish. So after a few minutes, I got a little panicky because the sun was moving, but they were nice enough to stop work and let me take my picture, which this I think are gorgeous. And you'll notice the eyes on this one, which I think are great. This is on the Capitol building in Oslo, Norway, which is fascinating. Now this detail here, which is on the city hall, a book was published by Christian Kjog, and it really shows the John, the prostitute, and the pimp. I didn't believe it until someone who was familiar with the book came and told me the story behind this detail. But I just found it fascinating at being on City Hall. So what kind of buildings were there prior to the City Hall can be in question. And in Paris, right near the Eiffel's Tower, I found these details. And you'll notice here, the initials of the sculptor right there, which I thought was great, like similar to the one on Madison Street in New York, which I thought these were great. In Stockholm, this is the post office built in 1906, renovated. But what was fascinating is that the entry is them showing airmail, even though it's by pigeons. But I thought it was just very fascinating that that would be done in such detail on a building, on a government building at that. But I thought this was, and showing this is the building, what it looks like in total. And I was in Turku in Finland. This was the capital of Finland prior, and then when the Soviets took over, they moved the capital from Turku to Helsinki because it was closer to Russia. But on this church, there were mushrooms, and speaking to the people in the church, there's some meaning with the mushrooms during a time when I think things were a depression or things were pretty not so great in Finland. And in Berlin, this is over a taxpayer where you had a restaurant below, two floors of apartments, and in the middle, right below the apartments over the store, with these details. And again, they're very well kept and maintained. And in London, there it is. In London, this was, I believe, a home for women. Now it's a hotel. But there were several details just of women near the entry. And this, which is what I didn't understand, this was over a parking lot by a church. And then I figured out later, this was at one time the graveyard of the church. This detail, as I was coming from the train station to the hotel, I saw this detail and fear that I might forget it. I unpacked my bag on the sidewalk and took the photograph. of a shepherd and 3 camels. Even though I think there was a sandwich shop below, but obviously this building had to do something with merchants and the selling of goods, I believe. And on the City Hall of Copenhagen, this is the sun, showing the sun and the moon. Another one, this was in Berlin on what's called the building was called the California Hotel. I got this. Again, the recessed eyes. And when I was in Chicago, this is a son. I thought about sending this to CBS Morning. And since the virus has been around, I've been resorting to just photographing the sun and the moon and things like that, which is, I guess, exciting in an odd way. And this is a very lucky shot I got. I know people talk about the man in the moon, and I guess come to the conclusion, I think there's a woman in the sun, because I think only a woman could coordinate so many planets and keep them going for such a long period. In 2008, I walked along York Avenue and saw this building, and it has details of explorers. I thought this building was exquisite. There wasn't many buildings like this along York Avenue. Most of them have been boxes like that, but I thought this was a really neat building. I got as far back as I could, and I took this Explorer. I thought this was great in 2008, a rare detail. I came back again in 2011, and it was gone. My first reaction, I think was a normal one, was to call 911 because they violated my public art. And could I make a citizen's arrest? And I called my attorney and told him what happened. He said, and all he said was, and? I said, well, they violated the Visual Arts Rights Act of 1990, and we should do something, because if this gets around, every building with a beautiful detail is now threatened. My attorney said he was going to get back to me, and I know he's very busy, but I let it go. It's really up to us, everybody listening, to do something about this and try to save these details. Norton Publishers, they were kind enough to let me publish 3 books. My first book, Faces in Stone, Animals, and then Figures in Stone, which is a combination of the other 2 books. And I was very grateful. So now I get people to really start looking at details, which is my ultimate objective. And I want to thank all of you for listening. And please remember, keep looking up. Thank you.
Okay, Robert.
Yes.
Well, first of all, thank you for that just amazing collection of images.
Thank you.
A lot of comments along those lines, so I'll just pass them along as one group. Thank you. We have a number of questions. Let me start with a couple of technical questions about how you got these photographs. You mentioned you had a long zoom lens.
Yes.
But that doesn't explain how you were able to get all these high up pictures on narrow streets. How did you do that?
The narrow streets, sometimes there's a parking lot. Sometimes I get on the stoop across the street, but most of the ones that you see were on wider streets. But I just tried my best. I don't manipulate the photographs.
No tricks.
No tricks. That's not.
Someone asked the question, and I don't know what it means, but it says, did you use a tilt shift lens?
No. I didn't use a tilt shift lens. No.
Okay. Someone else then asked, were these carvers, do you think, perhaps influenced by churches and church figures from perhaps their native countries, if they were immigrants here, artisans who were immigrants?
I mean, even though churches really started many of the figures early, I don't think there was an influence by the church. I think the skills were developed probably by the churches, by people doing churches, and that craft was passed on to others. And there were different schools in different parts of Europe that trained people on how to do these details. And many of the workers, and I think from the eyes, traveled from different developed. Like if there was a building boom in Warsaw, people would travel from Italy to Warsaw to work. And if there was a building boom in Barcelona or wherever, so people would, the craftsmen would travel.
Yes. Also, a question about stone versus terracotta. Is there more stone, more terracotta? Why would there be one and not the other?
I think that had to do with, I believe, to do with cost. Naturally, the terracotta lasts a lot, is much more durable, and one can do more colorful things with terracotta versus stone.
Ah, okay. Um, how long do you think it took to make one of these sculptures?
I would say probably about a few weeks if one worked consistently, because they were done in factories. If it was molded, they just poured the stone in the mold. If it was
Yes,
carved, I think probably about a week or two.
right. And what do you think these sculptures got paid? Were they paid well?
Someone sent me the grandson of the person who worked on the Vanderbilt mansion, gave me the pay scale, and they were paid a few dollars an hour. And so, I mean, I say a few, I'm talking about $2 or $3 an hour. And they were, his grandfather worked in one of the factories in Red Hook. And there are many, I was surprised of the cultural makeup of the workers. And there were also women stone cutters who did this work.
When now was this granite stone or were the castings? Were they cement? What were the
I
most
don't think it
common
was cement.
materials?
I'm not sure exactly of the material. I can honestly say I'm not sure of the material because many of the details I can't touch them, so it's really hard. It's hard to tell. But you could tell the some of the stone, the ones that were cast, and the terracotta. Those are the easiest. But what type of stone, I'm not sure. The ones that are brown stone, they're also very easy to detect, usually because they decay early.
Softer stones.
It's much softer stone. Yeah.
Yes, yes, yes. Obviously, builders chose to decorate rather ordinary buildings in many cases,
Yeah, these are
right?
just, but they were ordinary buildings in one respect, but they were special buildings for the people moving in. So I believe there was more sensitivity, is why the names of the buildings give them. So you'd have like the building would have identity, even though it was a row of building. Each building had identity, and many of the carvings on the front were different.
One of our viewers has commented that the architectural details were often of satyrs, and they were associated with abundance. Do you think that's
Possibly,
possible?
that is possible, definitely. One of
Yeah.
the things I did mention, I don't photograph famous buildings because everyone knows, like on the Woolworth building, the details there. I mean, those stone cutters were famous. But you have a building like the one on Madison Street, you know, and they deserve credit also.
Did you say that these factories were local?
Yes, most of them are local. I mean, some of the special ones may have been done outside of the city area, but economically, we pay to keep it in the area. And in Brooklyn and around Red Hook area, where many of the factories I understood were, it was easy to ship it to different parts of the city.
Did
Then,
you ever come across any catalogs of architectural detail elements?
no, no,
No?
I've been looking for old catalogs. Yeah, I've not found any. Not
Do
found
you
any.
think they may have had them? They
They
may have
had,
had them.
I believe they did. Whether they were published is another story. Well, or just catalogs given to developers and architects and people putting stones on buildings.
Someone just asked if these carvers might have been the same folks who did gravestones.
Possibly, it was a great skill. It was a skill.
Well, stone cutting 100, 150 years ago is a lot more common than it is today.
That is quite true. Yes, right. Even though
Robert, are you?
okay, I'm
Go
sorry.
ahead. Go ahead.
No,
Please
I'm
go
saying,
ahead.
even though in cemeteries they frown upon taking photographs, it's not very popular. So I don't take pictures of in cemeteries. I also don't photograph churches or I don't do government buildings either or famous buildings. Yeah, this religious
Well, Robert, are you planning to continue taking pictures?
for the rest of my life. I have about
Well, good. I hope.
17,000, but my objective is to get things landmarked. That's my objective.
Well, I hope you have a long life taking more of these pictures because we're going to have you back again as we always do and enjoy another session with you. I want to thank our audience today, and I want to thank you once again, Robert A. King, architect, for being our guest and speaker here today. Thanks from everyone in the audience, Robert, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you very much.
Bye all.
Bye. Keep looking up.